Hawks on the Wire is a podcast produced by Three Hawks Haven, an e-card company where love, kindness, and connection are designed in each e-card. The story you're about to hear, shared by Joan's guest, will be a story from someone's life, their personal experience. By learning from stories just like this, Three Hawks Haven is able to create beautiful and moving e-cards that can really touch someone's heart. In times of celebration or in the tougher times of life, Three Hawks Haven has e-cards for most any occasion, including some you just can't find anywhere else. You can shop for all their e-cards by going to their website, threehawkshaven.com. Now to Hawks on the Wire with your host, Joan.
Hi, my name is Joan, and I am your host for Hawks on the Wire, a podcast brought to you by Three Hawks Haven e-cards. Our website is threehawkshaven.com, and today we are talking to Lynette, and she is going to share her story related to the illness of her husband and how she faced many challenges, including a tremendous anger towards a doctor. But on the flip side, also how she found forgiveness. So I wanted to welcome you, Lynette. Thank you so much, beautiful lady, for joining us.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me.
You are welcome. How are you doing today?
Great. It's cold and drizzly here in Georgia, but it's beautiful in its own way. And I'm holding out hope for spring.
Yes, everybody loves spring. And would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, the listeners?
I'm just a regular person, and I did work as a child abuse investigator for years. I was a sexual abuse specialist with the state of Oklahoma. Through a series of events, I've come to be, I keep a blog at unexpectedmystic.com because things have happened in the last 10 years that have just blown me away, and it's a way to kind of keep track. So life has had a lot of unexpected twists and turns, and I have come to be in a place where I'm grateful for all of them.
Very good. Very good. So I think we'd like to start out with how you met your husband, Mike.
Oh, that was a happy day. The first time I saw him, the first time I laid eyes on him, it was almost like he was sitting in a shaft of golden light, which is kind of a meditative tool. But there was just this guy. We were at an AA meeting, at a noon meeting. I've been sober since December 6th of 1982. And I would drop into these noon meetings. We'd do a big book study. It's a way to get a lift in the middle of the day. And, you know, at the corner of the table, just kind of wrapped up and vibrating. I mean, he was literally vibrating with this kind of energy. And to me, it looked like he was all lit up, was this man, and his name was Mike. And so everyone's going around the table and reading and sharing, and the table was full of what I call the grumpy old men of AA. And those are those are the ones who just haven't quite found that joy, but they've acquired a lot of years. And so they consider themselves to be elder statesmen, but there's just a lot more possible if you really, really get into the 12 steps. So comes to Mike, and he just lit up, this great big smile, and his eyes were sparkling, and he said, "I can't believe it, but I am sober, and it is the biggest miracle that has ever happened. I will never let go of this. I have never been happier in my life." And I just thought it was lovely. So, you know, then he thanked it, and people were like, "Thanks for sharing," and it moves on. And the grumpy old men started chiming in. They started saying things like, "Oh, just wait, you'll fall off that pink cloud. You just wait, it's going to get real here," and blah, 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 blah. And so my experience of the 12 steps, I was 9 years sober at that point. My experience was that if you do those things consistently, and you go to many, many meetings, and you really, really work that stuff, you don't have to come off that pink cloud. So at the end of the meeting, after he'd been crushed by all these guys, I just kind of got over to him for the prayer. And after we did the little thing, the closing, I hung onto his hand and I said, you listen to me. I've been here 9 years doing this deal. And I know for a fact that if you keep doing what you're doing that got you to this point, you can stay where you are today. And he just, oh, he was so full of joy. And he said, thank you, thank you, thank you. And
Yes. Wonderful.
after that point, and then I don't know, 6-9 months later, we accidentally had what turned out to be our first date, and inseparable from that point.
Well, that is wonderful. I was actually in Al-Anon for 26 years, and
Oh, wow.
12-step people are wonderful. It's a wonderful program.
Yes.
So I just thrilled that you and Mike, you had a lovely first meeting. That's wonderful.
We did, and that spiritual foundation that we had from AA was the foundation of our relationship. And so, it was different from anything I'd ever experienced before, and the same for him, in that we talked about all of these, these concepts. We talked about God. We would sit for hours and just, discuss the steps and reality and what it was like to live sober and how to help others. And it was magical. It really, we had a charmed life.
Very good. Very good. And then we'll fast forward a little bit, because then that you did end up having to deal with an illness that Mike had.
Yes. Turns out the thing that got him sober, which was acute pancreatitis, can morph into a thing called chronic silent pancreatitis, where you don't have the agony of acute pancreatitis, but the damage is still being done to your organs. And so
you don't have a physical pain.
Right.
Things are going on. Yes.
Yes. So we were at an AA conference that we went to every year with a whole bunch of friends. And he said that his stomach was hurting, that he had this burning sensation that was a lot like what he had gone to the hospital for when he first got sober. And it really concerned him, because he always talked about that being the worst pain he had ever experienced in his life. And it kept getting worse. It kept getting worse. We finally cut short the conference, returned to Tulsa, and he went to the ER, and that's when they found that his pancreas was horribly calcified, and that had caused problems with the liver and blood sugar and just all of these things that turned into a cascade of health events that, led to some pretty dark places. And that part probably lasted 3 or 4 years, and then he reached a point of stability, and that was wonderful. So we were able to travel, and in the meantime, I had retired from doing abuse investigations and had started a business, and that gave us a lot of freedom, because I could run it from wherever, and that was great. So we had many, many good years together, even after he became ill.
Yes. And you mentioned how you called it a little jewel box of a house. Tell us about that. That was so lovely. I had this image of you all had like a little summer home, I picture.
Well, it was going to be our permanent home. It was, we started traveling in Mexico, and we just loved it. And so we thought, why not move? I can work long distance. He was, retired, and we found this little beachfront shack in a little fishing village called Chiverno Puerto. It was on the coast of Yucatan on the Gulf side, and it truly was a little shack. It was just a couple of bedrooms, but it did sit right on the water, and that was everything to us. So good heavens, we were able to buy it. And then he spent a year down there turning it into truly, truly a jewel box. We added some space, and Mike was an artist. He said not really, he was just a craftsman, but he did stained glass. He was incredible with wood. He loved to do tile work, and he made that house into a jewel box, just like I said. And it was our dream to spend the rest of our lives in that house and have the grandkids down. And, it was just going to be a wonderful, wonderful experience for us. And didn't quite work out that way.
Oh, I'm sorry too, Lynette. You don't know what life's gonna give us to you.
You never do.
No. And so Mike, he did end up in the hospital because of his pancreas.
He came home. I was packing all of our stuff in Tulsa to move and closing down the direct part of my business that would require my being in Tulsa. He came home and he wasn't well. He was retaining a lot of water, and there were just issues, and that led us ultimately. I won't go into all of the intervening time between November and April, but in April of 2011, he landed in the hospital, and through a series of events, he went into cardiac arrest, and I thought he was dead. That was, and I was with him while he, was in the process of losing his ability to maintain his oxygen levels. And when his O2 was down to like 36, I just remember he looked at me and he said, "I can't hang on, babe." And his eyes just went blank. And I heard him call a code. And I thought, I cannot live in this world without Mike. I can't even imagine a world without Mike. And to my knowledge, he was dead. So an hour and a half later, his doctor came in and told us they had, shocked him. I don't know how many times, but they'd managed to bring him back. But he was on a respirator and, in very bad condition.
Yes.
I was surprised to see that doctor because when he was going downhill, he was not able to be located. That's why Mike got into such bad shape. They were paging him on the overhead, also on his personal pager, and there was no response. And so, the nurse couldn't intubate, and there was no one else in the ICU ward who could intubate. And so without that doctor, he just went into this respiratory collapse.
Yes. And you found out later that he was in an area of the hospital that his beeper did not work, I think you said.
Yes. And as a result of that, the hospital made some changes that will help people going forward. They've found whatever the problem was, it wasn't malicious. It wasn't malicious. I ended up so angry with that doctor, I could hardly stand it, but he didn't do it on purpose. I know that for,
and
so the hospital makes does it help other families? There are phone numbers on the wall now in every ICU room. They've fixed that problem with the pagers and with the overhead so that never happens again.
Very good. And I do believe you told me that doctor did apologize to you.
Yeah, it was about, oh my gosh, maybe a month later. And Mike had been moved down to a regular medical floor. And I was leaving Mike's room and there he was. And at that point, I was so full of hatred and anger toward him, I could hardly stand it. But he grabbed my arm and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, "I just want you to know, I am so, so sorry. I'm so sorry about that night." So, it wasn't as if he was cavalier about it or had, no awareness of how deeply that impacted all of us. He's a good man. He's a good doctor, but it was just a bad situation. What happened?
Well, and it changed your whole life. Apparently, Mike's kidneys totally declined, and he ended up on dialysis.
Yeah, from that night, his kidneys stopped functioning at all, and he did end up on dialysis, which halted our, dream of moving to Mexico. We never got to live in that house. I was down there about 6 months, the year that Mike was there, but that was pretty much the extent of it. So our little jewel box on the sea was not something that we were able to share in the way that we had hoped. And I ended up in a state of post-traumatic stress. I know that's it's kind of thrown around these days, but from the second night that Mike was in the ICU after this event, I started having nightmares that were so terrifying and so excruciating that I lost my ability to sleep. And that made me kind of daytime crazy. Mm-hmm. I couldn't quit crying. It was really, really bad. And I know that, the dreams were of seeing people on the surface of water, and I was below and I couldn't get air and they couldn't help me. And so it's clearly related to what had happened with Mike.
Right. And you were there in the room. I mean, that is very traumatic.
Yeah. And the feeling of not being able to get help. I know that's generally a big thing with people who have PTSD or with some people, is that they felt like they should have acted, but weren't able to for one reason or another. And I certainly felt responsible for what had happened to him, even though, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't the doctor's fault.
No, but you're saying you felt powerless because you could not help Mike.
Right. Right. I mean, in the end, I called the hospital operator to try to get some help after he went dead like that. Because I didn't know what else to do. We were not getting medical help, and my God, he needed it.
Right.
So
you began to realize after 2 or 3 months that you were carrying this rage around, and But the awareness, I commend you for your awareness, beautiful lady. And you chose to go to counseling.
I did, but rage is not even sufficient to describe what it was. It was murderous. I was so focused on that doctor, and I had rich, detailed fantasies about how I would kill him. I mean, if I ever saw him again, I felt like I would just kill him. And I'm not that kind of violent person.
Wow.
I don't have a violent bone in my body. I've never assaulted anyone. I've never had, those kinds of thoughts. They were incredibly intrusive and constant. And I would dream of it. It just would not go away. And so, yeah, I went to a counselor, and after 3 or 4 sessions, because she would ask me how I was every time I went in, how are you doing? I would immediately start to cry. And she would say, what's going on? And I would just talk to her about how much I wanted to kill the doctor. Now I can laugh about it because I've been healed, but it was horrible to live through it. It really was. And after 3 or 4 sessions, she said, I don't think I can help you. I really think you need to see a psychiatrist. So, I went through that. But the thing is that it was not going away. It was not going away. And it was destroying my life. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, I was a social worker. I know about treatment efforts. I know about medications. Nothing was helping. Nothing was helping. And then that was in 2011. In September of 2012, Mike died as a result of the kidney damage. And then
September of 2012, Mike passed?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so that only increased my rage. The kidney damage led to that last hospitalization, and then some things happened, and he passed away. And I will never, even now when I'm living this, joyous, happy life, I will never forget what it was like to hear the last beat of his heart, because I was listening to his chest, I was holding him, and I could hear it slowing. And then it didn't come again. And the world before that last beat, when Mike was in it, and the world after, I still don't have the words to really put into to make it clear how that felt. It's an instant change.
Yes, your whole world turned upside down.
Yeah. And I remember looking out the window at the hospital and just, looking at the people walking around and the sunshine. It was a beautiful day, and just thinking, my life will never be the same. It never will be.
I really appreciate you sharing that, because that's not easy to share. You're talking about some deep feelings and grief, and thank you. I'm sure some of our listeners do understand what you're talking about.
Well, what I want people to hear is that there's hope. I didn't stay in that state. I didn't stay in the PTSD state. I know what happened to me. I consider it a miracle. It's actually what you call a spiritually transformative experience. But just like the 12 steps of AA can lead you to a spiritual awakening, or you can get that boom, instant spiritual awakening. It can happen for every one of us if we're willing to take, certain actions and certain steps.
Yes. We're open.
But my transformation from, normal woman to a raging maniac, it was so severe and so profound. I think that it was arranged maybe by Mike, with his help, with his guidance, with the spirit guides that I know everyone has, whether we acknowledge them or not. Something arranged for me to be driving across Tulsa in my little car with the top down and listening to NPR on, I believe it was April 13th of 2013. That was one day before my birthday. And I was crying, as usual, thinking about Mike, missing Mike. I'd just been to lunch at a restaurant that we used to go to. It's a little Jamaican joint down in Cherry Street in Tulsa. And something made me start listening to the voice I was hearing on NPR. I think it was when the man's voice shook. I was kind of hearing his words, and I'd kind of heard that he'd been a community organizer. He was a Quaker. He met this young child down in Mississippi when he was a freedom rider, and he and his wife had ended up adopting this young girl, and they just loved her. She became very successful in her life. She lived in Atlanta, made wedding dresses for people, very special little girl. And someone broke into her house and robbed her. And then he came back and he took more stuff out of her house. And then he went away. She came home, saw that she had been robbed, and he came back in again. And ultimately, he raped and murdered her.
Oh my
And
goodness.
he was addicted to crack cocaine. And when Hector started talking about that, my hero's name is Hector Black. He's the one that I was hearing on NPR that day. When he started talking about that, his voice broke, and that made me start crying even more. I had to pull over, and I just listened to what he was saying. The miracle happened when he talked about how devastated he was by the loss of his daughter, how senseless, how powerless he was over what had happened. How he couldn't protect her, he couldn't help her. And then he came to love the man who killed her. And that process, oh my God. I mean, even now I get chills just thinking about it. Somewhere in the midst of his story, after he talked about, hugging this man, forgiving him, developing a relationship with him in prison, it's like the top of my head popped open, like there was a lid on it. And all of this stuff swirled out. It was this black, dark, oily mistiness, and felt like there were sharp things in it. It was just hideous, and it just flowed out of my head in a column. And in the aftermath of that, I felt peace like I hadn't experienced in years.
Wow.
And there was a complete forgiveness of that doctor, of everything that had ever happened in Mike's care, and a freedom and quiet for the first time since that horrible night in 2011. There was quiet in my heart and my soul.
So you couldn't really see this dark, gray, oily, ugly stuff, but you could feel it leaving your body out of the top of your head.
I felt it. It was as real as if, someone had touched me on my arm. I felt it, absolutely. I knew exactly what it was. I could see it in my internal vision. I knew what it looked like. I could feel the consistency of what was in it. It was remarkable.
That is remarkable. That's amazing. And so you heard Hector, this gentleman that had lost his daughter to a person that had murdered her, and he decided to forgive this man that had murdered his daughter. And so you're telling me that he actually made contact with the man in prison.
He did. He started going to visit him, and they developed a long-term relationship. And in fact, over the ensuing years, they developed a sort of program that the two of them started sharing in various venues around the world about forgiveness and the healing of forgiveness and love. Because that's what it was. It was love, Joan. It was the love that I believe the universe is made of that came in that day and I think saved my life.
I agree. You were meant to hear that story by Hector Black, and that unbelievable forgiveness from him gave you forgiveness.
It did. Because I had been trying, that was 2013. This event happened in 2011. I've been trying. I've been seeing a therapist who I didn't scare. I've been taking, a little nighttime pill for about 6 months to help me sleep. I had been trying to fix this, and I couldn't. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I had completely lost myself.
Yes. And I think, well, doesn't anger do that to us? That's not who we really are. And you knew.
It's a poison. And that's what came out. That was that swirling, smoky ugliness. It was all of the poison that I had it wasn't on purpose. I wasn't harboring that. I wasn't, watering it and trying to make it grow. I was trying to make it go away. I just wasn't having any luck, So that spontaneous event healed me.
That's wonderful.
Instantly.
I just love that. And tell us a little more how you really felt. I mean, I'm just trying to picture you there in your car, and you've been crying, and all this yucky gray stuff came out of your body, and then you're feeling like peace.
It was complete peace. It was a peace so profound I haven't really felt anything like it since. I mean, that was to me the spiritual nature of it, that it was, I believe that's our natural state of being, to be at peace, to be in a state of love, to be in a state of awareness. But I had not had anything like it in so long that for me, it was like this, just a deafening silence of the constant litany of hatred and anger that had been running through my mind ever since that night.
Yes. And you knew
I
that
was,
harming you. You knew that was harming you.
oh, absolutely. But again, I didn't know how to fix it.
You didn't know how.
So it was instant cleansing of everything that blocked me from the nature of who we are, our true reality, which is that state of peace, which is that state of calm and an awareness of love and the experience of love. All of that was just swept away, swept out of me.
And you were free and clean and at peace.
I was free and clean and at peace, and I knew that it was permanent. You know, I knew instantly that that was a permanent state of being. I recognized, because I'd been doing a lot of reading on spiritual topics since Mike's death, and I recognized the gift for what it was. I recognized how fortunate, how blessed I was to have that taken out, because again, like I said, 2 years and I was not having any luck. It wasn't making it going away. So that was, that was my miracle. One of many that, happened after his death. But wow, that's the most life-changing thing that I've ever experienced.
And beautiful lady, I commend you for that, because you were open. You wanted that ugliness to be out of your life. And I really commend you for being open like that. And I do think that Mike, like you said, had something to do with that, you hearing that radio.
Yeah, I'm confident that he did. Yeah, because he has communicated so clearly through mediums and in my own contacts with him that all he wants is for me to be happy. It wasn't long after that experience that I had I wasn't really out of body, but I noticed, I observed myself laughing. And I had a reading not long thereafter, and the medium said, your husband wants you to know that when you laugh, that goes directly to his heart, that he rejoices in hearing laughter again, because that was one thing he always said that he liked, was the way that I laughed. And, and we had so many good times together, and so we shared so many. Oh, he was such a funny man. Yeah, it was magic.
Many good, wonderful, magical memories.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
What would you advise our listeners if somebody, is carrying, it's a burden, to carry around, where you really do know you need to forgive someone, or perhaps even forgive yourself, but you're angry? What would you advise?
Well, I do have suggestions, because I went on and did some really important and transformational forgiveness work for myself. And I was led to the work of Colin Tipping, COLINTIPPING. He passed in the last year, but he wrote 2 books. One is Radical Forgiveness, and the other is Radical Self-Forgiveness.
Very good.
And
spelling his name one more time, a little slow.
COLIN, and the last name is Tipping, like tipping point. And the books are Radical Forgiveness and Radical Self-Forgiveness. And they are a step-by-step process to take you to a point where you can see that all is forgiven, and how to accomplish that. And I did that work in a 2-day silent individual retreat that I arranged for myself in a little cabin out on a lake. And that was another form of magic. So I was able to let everybody else off the hook through the magic of that experience in the car. And then I could finally let myself off the hook through the magic of that book.
Wonderful.
And then the other thing for anybody who is just starting out on any kind of spiritual path is to read the stories of near-death experiencers. Just read those and read those and read those and read more and more. And if there's anything in there that you find frightening, set it aside and read the joyful, hopeful, divine experiences of these people who have actually stopped living human life for a short period of time, some of them a fairly long period of time, and come back to tell us what awaits. Because forgiveness is instant. Once we lose these human suits with that last breath, forgiveness flows into all of us. It's just a whole lot happier life being here if we can accomplish that, while we're still walking around and breathing.
Yes. And I see that in you. You are a bright light, beautiful lady. And
We all have that light. My light was dimmed by that awfulness in those 2 years, but being set free, whoa, I'm so grateful.
yes, I can tell you have a beautiful, grateful heart. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Lynette. I really appreciate
You are so welcome.
Well, and I want to thank our dear listeners for joining us again. It's so good to be with you again. And to remind you that our e-cards are for lots of different occasions, but especially the challenges sometimes that people face in our lives. So I invite you to browse at 3hawkshaven.com and perhaps send someone an e-card. Let them know you're thinking about them. Brighten their day. And if you have a story that you think the Hawks would like to hear, please go to 3hawkshaven.com and send us your email. We would love to hear from you. We would love to hear your story. And remember, when we share our humanity, we share the possibility to heal. Thank you.